Chili here, and this is Sirius Talis Moon. Mercury 22 in Taurus, what a great time to tell morbid stories. And this is a story of Venus hour, Venus Venus in Mercury sign. Oh, Mercury actually conjoins the Sun now. So I want to tell a story. And the story goes like this. There is a person, and this person does ritual, and he becomes headless. And um, he goes to a man, let's say a man, and he tells this man, you go, you see this person sleeping, they have fantasy like this, they have that, until he convinces this man basically to be what this man thinks, and he said to this man, if you pay to me, you can be with this person and so on. And this man pays to him, and he tries to be with this person. But the other person, and not at all aware of these things. And the other person, they wake up and they're like, who are these rapists? Well, how do we kill the rapists? And this person tried to turn to Beta Perse, and he tried to turn to Aries, and so on and so forth. And that person says, here, take my talisman. And that person takes the talisman and says, oh, it begin to work. And then that person that was paying money begins to be haunted. All the estates don't yield, all the this, all the that. Now, that person that was doing this right and trying to convince people that they can buy the ability to sleep with people. And but that person that bought this talisman says, wait a second, what if I didn't have money to buy this talisman? You have to protect me, and then that person begins to abolish rape altogether. Because that person begins to use the words that the person that did the headless rite uses, but they don't know it. They say, but mass deaths upon mass death, dead bodies upon dead bodies of all the rapists. And that person that was convinced to pay money, they think, but I'm not rapist. Of course you are. And how did you get convinced to think that you can pay money? But they wanted this, the fantasy, and so on and so forth. And then that person says, okay, whoever made you think like this, then turn to them and kill them. Definitely not the sleeping infant or the sleeping person. And then what was thought to be a ritual that where one person will pay to not be raped and one person will pay to rape, and they will fight each other, became that now they begin to both say, wait a second, who convinced you that the sleeping person is probably because you were raped as infant? If the rapist was probably raped as infant, only that way could be convinced to think that this is sensuality. And then both of them begin to say, okay, we both deserve reparations from whoever made the people be in those type of situations. And they begin to dissolve a religion and dissolve policies and do a Me Too and do a of what actually causes rapists to rape and work and took raise awareness to ritual abuse and to extortion cults and so on and so forth. This is a little bit like the story of this Mercury meeting Sun on Beta Persei. Now it leaves us with the semi-sextile to Mars, Chiron, and Aries, which is causing a certain chaos to try to make money from this chaos, which ends up with people saying, okay, a real estate can only be without rape. And then they pinpoint to the people that created the chaos. This is also a time of persecution of the Jews, that were the bankers that were orchestrating this, orchestrating that, and were trying to profit off of people's quarrels because they themselves could not be included in business. And then the people say, okay, but if the Jews don't rape, then we can establish business that is not on basis of rape, but the Jews will have to not enslave. And just say, but we were enslaved. We say, okay, we'll have to abolish slave from all things, both Judaism and not Judaism. And we have to not rape infants in rites, in occultistic rites, both Judaism and not Judaism. For the housing to house and so on and so forth. And only that way people can have doubling the population, because the birthing experience is like a psychosis experience. It's a transition from life to death, or death to life. And so those that were disincluded, that created chaos to be included, are now being presented with a picture that says, like, hey, you can be included, but we cannot have a ritual abuse, and we cannot have a slavery, and we cannot have all of these things that they try to believe that they are just a part of the colors of the world, and they're not. Beta per se eclipses every 2.5 days. And when it eclipses, it's dead bodies upon dead bodies. Why? Because the raped infant was accused for being raped. And when when beta per se is when we reach beta per se was not rape, then it's wealth in spirit and in matter. It's a tantric union of embodiment. It's honoring the feminine masculine. It's honoring the erotic non-erotic. And any time that people try to say, okay, we overwhelm, oh, but standard all is too much, no. Because systemic energy. Yeah, but equal systemic energy we will not have if there is slavery. Good morning. That's why technology was halted and there were missing scientists and so on and so forth. And this story is going to, first of all, the moon is in a closing phase, is going to apply to Mars, Chiron, and Aries. And we're going to hear a lot about the wound around anti-Semitism, but also around the global intifada. Because basically what were Palestinians doing? The same thing that the Jews were doing, to be included. And now they can't escape that. I mean, they can escape that if they acknowledge that, if they abolish rape. Because now what they want also to have a country, and is thinking, if the Holocaust was Jewish traffics Jew, and then they looted the wealth of the Jews, and then they made a new country, but in that new country was also trafficking. Then what is Palestinian state? It means that there was Palestinian organization that trafficked Palestinian and extorted the West to do genocide, so that they will loot the money of Palestinian people, and then will be the supposedly charitable providers of country welfare. Now, wealth redistribution is important, but the only way out of those type of tragedies, and indeed the new moon is going to be around Israel's sun, is to abolish ritual abuse, to abolish in spirit and in matter. And this is true both to in Israel, but also in Palestine, and also in any other country. Netherlands, that was the country that Benjamin Netanyahu called it before announcing to the people on the war on 7th of October. Um, but the guy he calls is now head of NATO. He called is now head of NATO. I think Rutte was caretaker prime minister back then, which actually has more authorities. But at that day, basically, the country was invaded, and there were massacres and so on and so forth. And then there was the response, so to speak, which is now I think Israel has been, I don't know if it's been litigated for genocide and so on. So and not good to be a judge in the Hague, because when the Americans got litigated like that, there was the Ming dossiers, Rolodex, Rolodex. But I guess this is how they clear. Country doesn't want to be litigated for genocide, and then they clear the Supreme Court in. So now Netherlands has said they're not going to acknowledge the Israeli settlements. I don't know what about the Flanders. If they want to unify, not unify. Um, but this is a certain step that is interesting, a shift of policy by the Netherlands. And basically, it's a signifying Israel that they're not going to have a 67, because it's going to be Saturn return for 60 for the 67 war. Now, yeah, one could say, well, the Saturn return for the 67 war is already now, because it was between Pisces and Aries. And we already see how, let's say, the removal of investments from the companies that were developed by the people that were born in 67, which is Palantir. And that was indeed a part of their Saturn return, of Alex Karp's Saturn return and Peter Thiel's Saturn return. But then the banks began to invest, and now it basically ties in Palantir to the Jewish bankers, with the kind of like, the up and down side of being favored, with all that entails. And this is yeah, it's just like, yeah, but Netherlands decided not to acknowledge the settlements, is signifying Israel that if they think to have the Eretz Israel Shlema, or the imperial aspirations, that Europe will not, or where the ICC is, will not be by their side, which is going to create an influx of exposure of wherever, let's say, Netherlands was participating in Epstein dossiers, for example. And it's going to be pertaining more to the current government, very likely, or to the people that took that decision. And so very likely to the Supreme Court. So now, when it comes to the alliances, Davos and the Dutch people still there. Yes, I think it's a tremendous kind of like, if you think in acupuncture, they have like it's a pressure point. It's on the meridian. The Rolodex meridian. Yeah, people are like, oh, she really came back to life. um, Now, this is where we're going to see how the moon progresses with this Mars Chiron, because it's supposed to cross them today. So around the evening, the night, from let's say Europe, they're gonna experience this more tonight, where the moon crosses Mars, Aries, and Chiron. And here is again the difficulty of the question, because um, the people that were born into those things, they did not choose to be. They did not even choose to be born, right? So, and this is where the question of ceasing the practices like ritual abuse and so on and so forth um, comes to play, and it's not going to be a simple question, because Mars Aries is kind of like a chaos creation, and the Chiron is a wound around that, and this is exactly pertaining to that story. It's kind of like the people begin to awaken and say, okay, what the person that was harming me, they were also raped. So what is so how do we abolish that which create rapists? So we go to, let's say, classified project budget, or the training of the military, or the training of the intelligence, or um, and to the fact that, let's say, during the Second World War, to survive, people had to create chaos between others so that they can have diversive tactics. So people would fight with one another, and then they could escape and they could run, and so on and so forth. And that's also how people escaped, in times of the Holocaust. So we have the wound around Aries. Um, and and also with this Aries as a transit, different people are the causers of chaos and the participants in chaos. Which means that the underlying notion of this chaos is being, how should I say, people begin to unravel the structure of this chaos, particularly when Saturn is going to meet Aries. So if you think 28 years to, let's say, 2.5 years from now, so it's going to be 27, 28. It's going to be the 20. It's going to be the 2000s. 9/11, for example, um, was also Saturn Aries. When I think about it, should have been a Saturn Aries, or or the aftermath of a Saturn Aries. And this is when I was, for example, trying to channel after being tortured. Now it's like, it's not the best position to channel when one is being tortured, because they would be susceptible to mind control. And so Um, and when those things happen in, let's say, even hospitals and stuff like that, then people don't really have, it's not like they can turn to someone or whatnot. Um, they can just try to regain the sovereignty to the best sense that they can. And then I was seeing, it was the moon was around Scorpio, and I was hearing, how do we say 9/11 in simple English? And I was like, what's to do with 9/11? Like, nothing was nothing in my lexicon back then because it was like a long time ago. And I said, what is this? It was like fair trade. And then it little by little it dawned on me. Because the people that are there, they do rituals to get there, and then what they trade, and so on and so forth. Uh, it was a terrible disaster. I remember when I saw this at first, I thought it was an idiot crashing their plane into, into the building. But I did, and it was so shocked that only after there were missiles, an entire, I don't know how many tons fell on a building in Ashkelon, less than 10-story building. Did not kill, took one apartment, maybe two apartments, and I'm like, then imagine a plane and 9/11. Like, you can also see what little knowledge I have in explosions, because it. Now, if we think about NASA scientists, why they're missing, because at NASA, if you don't want to have a challenger, you need to know when will something explode or what would cause something to explode. And, and those that know that went missing. Which means we're probably it's going to be like Saturn returned to 9/11. So. Uh, 9/11 and human trade is 9/11. Now, when I was thinking 9/11, human trade is 9/11, I didn't computate that much that 9/11 was 9/11 on human trade. That level of dissociation, and I did not even have family at the 9/11 that I know of. Imagine the people that had a loved ones there. Maybe they know more. I don't know. Maybe it's like the way the treason goes in the family. But no, but this is. Um, and so there is just the awareness is like, okay, there's this big house. Netherlands did not acknowledge the settlements in Israel, and of course, Israel that thinks that they're going to, and then the Israel, some people were told that they're going to have redemption of land and whatever. So it is ensuing chaos. Um, and then the people that couldn't participate in trade, they became those Jewish bankers. So it's a question of like kind of like what to do. um, right now, Moon is 18 degrees, Aries, ascendant with Jupiter. Um, yeah, so this is this semi-sextile between the Aries stuff that's happening, the end decan of Aries, and the Beta per se. And Now here is the thing. With Aries, it was Trojan War. With Beta Persei, it was dead bodies upon dead bodies because of the raped people. When Aries was closer to the first decan of Aries, or within the first decan of Aries, we had the Second World War when Uranus, Saturn, and Mars were in Beta Persei. That was the death camps. Was the building of the death camps, and then in 1939 to 1941, and then the death camps. So let's say Arbeit macht nicht frei. Basically, and we've seen tendencies, for example, people being imprisoned by mass in the United States and then are put in forced labor, is concentration camps. And yeah. Mama, later. Later? I will clean it later. Kitten, the tension between kittens and gardens. You have dear plants and dear cats. They're going to collide somewhere. Now, with Aries, the solution to not being included was to create chaos. Because what happened? Because this fights with this, and this fights with that, and that fights with that, what happens? Another person goes to the tables and they have lunch, and then they have a place to sleep, and then they have. As long as I let them fight and so, but if somebody is raped and being accused of their rape, then it's dead bodies upon dead bodies upon dead bodies upon dead bodies, and that they had, it's kind of like they had a settlement, but now they're being killed because they were part of the people that caused the rape. This is also the challenges around the semi-sextile. I talked about Chiron, transiting Chiron and transiting Uranus in a semi-sextile, where astrology cannot be all the answers to the current problems. And all the current problems cannot be delineated by astrology alone. For example, if we don't know about ritual abuse, then we don't know that Aries is the Trojan War that also is associated with the Jews not being included in trade and so on and so forth. So the semi-sextile between Beta Persei and, let's say, Andromeda is that Andromeda was saved by somebody if she would sleep with them, and Beta Persei was raped and not believed, and so on and so forth. So with Andromeda, it's kind of like she would have to lie to her savior that she will sleep with him so that she will not be sacrificed. With Beta Persei, it's kind of like, well, what did you expect? Dead bodies upon dead bodies. If you are a rapist like them, or if you're sacrificed like them, and so on and so forth, then and what would be the solution? That to abolish the human sacrifice. Um, and people that asked why does the raped people don't want to work ended up being in labor camps. Even when they think about, let's say, targeting people, the amount of energy they put into that is they're already enslaved by these people now. Is and they didn't, and it was like, what? It is think about, the person say, I'm trying to help this homeless get a job. Yeah, but you have to adjust the working sector to not be a dead camp. If you're trying to help the homeless to get a job at a labor camp, then you're not helping the homeless. You're putting them in concentration camps. And then the concentration camps were created by people that were not included in trade. And then they became bankers, they became debt collectors. Um, Difficult reality. The moon is going to accentuate this Aries, and then it's going to go to the lunation around the Beta Persei. With Uranus Aries, we found out that was the Me Too, and we found out that Aries discovered that to create chaos around, oh, so let's accuse everybody about sexual misconduct. Amazing. From Aries' point of view, it was to be included with the chaos, but from other people, it was like, yeah, then it needs to change. This reality needs to change. And then people began to be feeling this included. Oh, now the rapists are cancelled. But wait a second, the rapists were raped in secret societies and they're afraid of decapitation. So were the people that were raped and spoke up. And then it's kind of like, well, they better sort this out by the end of Aries, because think about Aries conjoining Beta Persei. That is once in a 525-year cycle. When was Aries conjoining Algol? I don't know, because I don't have the opportunity to check this in the ephemeris here. Okay, AI predicts it would be intense power and transformation, reclamation of power, feminine energy and rebellion, high stakes disruption, as seen in 2024 and 2025, when people triggered when the Mars, Uranus, and the Sun triggered Beta Persei, shattering of illusions, creative, visionary energy, out of the box thinking. Mars, Uranus conjoined Algol squared by Aries was noted. No, it was not squared by Aries. May 2025. Yeah, but okay, AI doesn't know to computate it yet. Okay. I don't know what programs will know to computate this. Because it's a once in 500 cycle. So let's think, because Aries, for how long will Aries go through Taurus? Yes, I'm trying to computate astrology now. On the spot with a little bit of dyscalculia. So popcorns, Aries in Taurus years. How long does it take to be in Taurus? Because around the mid 40s, it's going to ingress to Taurus. Taurus will fully enter, yes. Historically, it was between 1534 to 1535. So this is a very quick transit, unlike the century in Aries, if this is true. Some people say it brings good troubles, triggers change in established system. Let's take a look at those years, because around the 1530, let's say 2 or 3, it would have been the Beta Persei conjoined Aries. So let's say 1532, 532, history. Nika riots begin in Constantinople, revolt against the Byzantine Empire. Justinian I that leaves, half the city burned and 1,000 dead. Again, dead bodies upon dead bodies, as promised by Beta Persei. The riots are sparked by botched execution Beta Persei of chariot racing supporters, and end only after Empress Theodora refuses to flee, forcing her husband to act decisively. Nika uprising fails. 30,000 are killed by troops loyal to the emperor and the hippodrome. Uh, Boniface II ends his regime as a Catholic pope. Start of Dionysian Pascal cycle. Okay. Three days earlier, several members of the blue and green factions who had been arrested for earlier disturbance were to be hanged. But the execution was botched and 2 men survived, found sanctuary in the church, which was then put under guard. What destroyed Constantinople? So it probably would have been something like a Trojan war that brings dead bodies upon dead bodies. I'm recording. Volcanic winter of 536. That would be upon the ingress of Aries to Gemini. Now, here, because of the changing of, because we're already talking about something that would put us to question whether we want to work with the sidereal or with the tropical. Why am I saying that? Because if it takes 27,000 years, we would say, oh, well, 1,000 years, 3,000 years, 2,000 years, not that much. Well, 27, if we divide it to 3, we get 9,000. And things can move a degree here or there. The fixed stars definitely move. So it brings in the question of what would be the most optimal division, because the sidereal constellations, let's just say, and the tropical division, which is by seasons, they began aligned and they began to disalign. Will they realign again? I don't know. Um, this is where astrology turns to astronomy. Um, what happened 554? That would already be afterwards. So we had the fall of Constantinople, probably something like a Trojan war that caused dead bodies upon dead bodies. Um, Again, when we go that far back, the significations of Beta Persei, um, she would still be the star that when it eclipses, that there can be dead bodies upon dead bodies, um, but we probably have different culture, different contexts. Um, and yet, it is what it is. When we train our soldiers with rape, we can't expect them to actually achieve sovereignty or defend sovereignty. For example, Dutch East India was escaping the Roman Catholic Church. They took the gold and they brought silver. In Spain, it regulated the currency. And Spain, well, we think about the Spain as the Spanish Inquisition. So people could buy food. It means that they would be a little bit more sustainable during the Spanish Inquisition. Um, and it was the first traded company, and that financial hoax was needed to sustain people. But then the women were expected to have a life insurance. Would that life insurance yield? And so eventually people had to abolish the Inquisition. Because that's what caused this. What is the Inquisition? The rape of the feminine. Okay, but basically they rape the infants and they call it corrupting the feminine. And then they use through the infants, through the raped and tortured people that lose their sense of self, they do crimes through that person basically. And then they try to hold that person accountable for crimes and say, okay, you can be redeemed if you follow church and so on and so forth, basically but to commit more crime. Until they basically abolish rape. Now, if we're talking about looting, then stealing from the Spanish banks, stealing the silver from the Spanish bank, enabled Spanish people to eat. It is a good practice if Spanish people don't rape. But if Spanish people follow the church that rapes the infants, maybe it's not a good practice. But then for the infants to not have access to food is not good. Because if an infant can steal, if a child can steal a couple of silver and buy food with that, it's less harm. But if people are not allowed to trade, then they will have to what? They will have to access food. They will have to access land. Either they will have land and they can grow food, or they'll have to steal food. And then when we act against thieves, this is where Deneb Algadi protects thieves, because when we act against thieves, what are thieves to do? They say, well, okay, we didn't want to be raped. Now, if people don't acknowledge that there is such thing as rape, then what is their inquisition? And then what is the solution? Let's say somebody say, oh, you need to repent, you're a whore, you're a this, and then some other guy says, here, Jeanne d'Arc, come rein. We torture this guy. He says, not good to torture, so maybe we just kill him. Yeah, but then we're murderers. So we say, okay, we harm him until he converts But to Christian, say, but it, so until it doesn't rape, until it doesn't rape. Okay, okay. Well, we don't rape him, because that perpetuates the Inquisition. And but then he will have to commit thievery. The whole point is that he will be thievery, and then he will stop saying that the person is thief. So there, but then he said, but if the person is raped, then they say, okay, but we don't rape you, but then you have to understand. Eventually, the more people understood that we cannot rape the infants, not even in astral, and that yes, the church does these things, or the synagogue or whatnot, and that if and that stealing food, it means a child was hungry, and if it is cannot absorb minerals, is because of that infant was raped. And the seven deadly sins are basically one sin that was to rape the infants. Then they don't chase after the thieves, but they actually make sure that everybody has food, and they don't force marriage or traffic people or think that they can pay for to have, because then actually if they rape, basically they've subjected themselves to assassination. um, so and then we also have to make sure that even if people are in prison, that they will be well treated, because otherwise it's no problem to recruit them or to do more crime. Now, and if a person is exhausted, they're not lazy. They're basically exhausted because something happened to them. And that also means that people can't enslave people. But it also have to think that if somebody is not defended, then they would create a chaos until they're defended. So that they will not be raped. And if they are helpless, then they will say, okay, dead bodies upon dead bodies, dead bodies upon dead bodies, dead bodies upon dead bodies of all the rapists, of all the businesses, all that they wish to gain from raping, they'll lose all they wish to gain from raping other people, and blah, 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 blah. That's the thing, because when infants are raped, everything, but nothing is sacred and when a person was raped as infant, then until they're safe and free, that's kind of like the trajectory of the soul.